So it's been announced that 40 heroes will be rebalanced in the next 2 months. And first of all, if you weren't aware of it, then be aware of it. And I thought it would be fun to make a video guessing which heroes might be on the list. Full disclaimer, I have zero insider knowledge, so this is completely my own guesswork. I'm going to be talking about heroes that either I think deserve a buff or might have a buff coming for other reasons, or I just secretly really want them to have a buff for some unknown reason. So I'm going to be talking about 40 heroes that I think might make the list. No insider knowledge, but I think it is useful to at least be aware of the concept that the changes are coming, because if you think about heroes to tome or to dust or even to wish list or even to equip, actually, before you spend a lot of your resources, at least know that some heroes can be changed, and then the meta can change with that as well. It can change quite significantly. So last time, I think a big hero rebalancing was introduced. The meta completely changed direction from, I think, blue and yellow to purple. So do be aware. And with that in mind, let's get started. So I've decided to split this into rarities, and I'm only talking about rare, epic, and legendary heroes. So let's start off with the rare heroes. And most of them, I think, should be buffed based on the same reason. So the first hero we're going to look at is Alas. And what we're going to be focusing on is his special abilities. So it's a sub 300% attack on a single enemy. And this, I think, is actually really weak, because these attack heroes are very squishy anyway, and I don't think that this is going to be a very big attack damage. And we can look at Elijah, my second hero on the list, pretty much around the same direct damage. And you can see the debuff is not very strong, like just one poison on a single enemy. It's a pretty weak ability. He is quite an older rare hero, so I think with the newer rare heroes that have been released, those are far more powerful than some of the names that I have on this list. So let's move on. Number 3, I have Zora. Again, pretty much the same issue. So this one's a little bit stronger. She actually does stun, but I would still like to see her doing more. If you compare her to some of the newer heroes who are doing around 300% damage proper, then I think this is quite a good one. And since they kind of hard nerfed sleep, I think it's nice if we can get better crowd control heroes at the rare and epic level. And next, I want to talk about Sadon. Trying to find him. Here we go. So number 4, again, the same thing. So he does a low attack damage, and then he does increase speed, which I think is not super useful for an attack hero rather than a support hero. And Lurog, guy in the same family. So Lurog is actually a hero who I think is really weak at the moment, to the point that I don't think many people will build him. He gains increased attack, increased critical crit rate, but he doesn't actually do any damage. So he's a pure tile damage hero, just like Maharo, just like Vanessa. And those heroes you don't see around very often. So I think that he is worth reworking, at least. And we are going to talk about... We're going to skip the Empire. We're going to go to the Dark Followers. I'm going to talk about Art. So Art is sister of Brig, and here you actually see an extremely low attack damage percent. So the previous ones you saw around 280. This is 215, so much lower. And the buffs that she gains are not very conducive to increasing her attack damage. She does get a bit of a bonus in her passive ability for the buffs that she has, but she's going to hit before the buff, and her buffs only last 2 turns. So I feel like she's a really weak hero as it stands. And our last rare hero, we're going to talk about Izumi. So when I first saw Izumi, I kind of misunderstood what she does. So she does an attack damage again, kind of sub 300, and then she does status block on a single enemy. I think that's not extremely strong, just to have status block on just one. So I'd like to see her getting buffed a little bit more. And you can see kind of the theme for all of these is they're attack-based heroes. They do a bit of damage, which I feel is weak. They're doing something else along with their damage, which is kind of weak. So that's why I would put them on the list. I haven't put anyone on the list for getting nerfed because I think so far in Gemstone Legends, we normally get heroes being buffed rather than nerfed, and I think that is a good direction that they've decided to go in general. So now let's talk about the epic heroes. And the epics is roughly kind of as big of a category as the legendary heroes, as you'll see. So let's talk about Danka. So Danka, I haven't really seen anywhere. And Danka is going to fall into the category of heroes that I think have fallen behind based on the newer heroes that they have released. We used to see heroes with 1 cleanse or 1 dispel, and with some of the newer heroes, they do 1 cleanse and then a percentage chance for a 2nd cleanse, or 1 dispel and a percentage chance for a 2nd dispel. So I think basically this is what is needed for Danka. Maybe something else that she can do, a 2nd buff or a 2nd percentage chance to dispel. Not dispel, cleanse. And our next hero is in the same family, Iskra. So I've never really seen Iskra being used. She is a revive hero, just like her sisters Polina and Ozanka. But the reason that she's problematic is she doesn't have a 100% chance to resurrect anyone. So I think that this needs to be rethought. The maximum ability needs to go to 100, or they need to rework her completely, and that would bring her to a level where she could start to compete with the other revive heroes, especially at epic level. Our next hero is still in this faction. I want to talk about Roland. Roland the Magnificent is not very magnificent. So he is a hero I find very hard to use. He does a bunch of debuffs and then he does damage, but the damage in my view is not very strong because you need to build his accuracy, you need to build his defense, you need to build CR, CD. It's all a lot to handle, so you always end up with a very meh build that you can't do much with. So I would like to see him being reworked, so maybe a bit of a better passive ability, or I think just an increase to the percentage damage that he's dealing. That would be nice. Our next hero, we're going to skip over to the bear faction. And I want to talk about Yorgala, which is actually a hero that I really enjoy using. So I really love that she gives a really big protective shield, but the problem is it's very difficult to use her on defense, because her shield only lasts for 2 turns, and there's always the risk that that is not going to happen when the enemy is moving. So she's one of the heroes that's very difficult to use on defense. I think one of the things that could be done is, if they want to keep her as an offensive hero, they could increase the percentage in her passive abilities. So if you would look at Lenora or Liliana, they have a much higher percentage to trigger their passive ability. The other thing they could do is, if they don't want to increase the number of turns from 2 to 3, for example, they could do what Karagon has, which is a percentage chance to have it be for 1 turn longer instead. So that's a simple thing I feel like they could do. Next, we're going to talk about Erica. Erica is a bit like Danka that we talked about, so except she's dispelling instead of cleansing. So she's removing 1 status from all enemies. Her damage is not very high. She has some kind of passive ability that has nothing to do with the special ability. So I would like to see her having a second dispel or a percentage chance to dispel added to her special ability. Next, we're going to talk about one of my heroes that I leveled once upon a time and actually ascended him, but I had to feed him away as a tome because he was so terrible. I think he does deserve a buff because he is just so terrible. He does damage based on his max HP, and then he recovers a little bit of mana. I can see how this is designed to work because he gains mana breath and he can pretty much fully charge again if he's on his turn. However, his damage is just so weak that I think this just really needs to be buffed. So if you look at a hero build, it's not just about the percentage damage which is written on the skill, but it's also what you can build up using the awakening. And you can see with Hjalmar, his awakening is on speed, which is not going to do anything for his survivability or his damage. Speed is kind of irrelevant for him. So I feel like he needs to be significantly buffed. They did do, by the way, a similar thing to Sigrun, who also did very weak damage and then recovers a bit of mana. So it's not unprecedented. I really hope that Hjalmar gets a buff. Next, we're going to talk about, again, very similar situation as Erica. We're going to talk about Chloe. So Chloe does a little bit of damage. She does curse. She removes 1 status. I actually feel that Chloe is a very fun hero because she has matched gemstones 4 times. One thing they could do, which is a smaller buff, is just to make the remove 1 positive status the first part of her special. So just flip the order around. But I would also like to see her doing a bit more, either a percentage chance to remove a 2nd status or do a 2nd curse, maybe, which is also a bit of a weaker buff. So the next hero we're going to talk about, let's talk about Asaria. So she's here. She's one of the mercenary sisters, and they're paired with the mercenary brothers. I don't think anyone really uses them together because it's been shown that they're both squishy heroes, and soul linking them is a good way to kill both of them at once. Saria, I have a problem because she does damage to a single enemy extremely weak, right? We said that if 300 is our benchmark and the rare heroes are normally doing 280, you would kind of expect that for an epic hero, she would be doing something a little bit better than 223, but here we go. And actually, she doesn't even have a 100% chance to stun a single enemy, and I think that's pretty horrible, seeing as you have multiple rare heroes that do have 100% chance to stun. So I think she needs that 100% chance to stun, at the very least, if not increasing her damage as well. If we look at another hero from the mercenary sister family, we can see Alavera. And Alavera does a similar thing, but she does damage to all enemies. And then she does 50% chance to snare on all enemies for 5 turns. And once again, I have a big problem that she's doing only 50% chance, not 100% chance. And the other problem is snare. If you're not familiar with snare, is a debuff where you want as few turns on the counter as possible, because snare activates when the counter goes to 0 at the end of the turn. That means if you have snare for 5 turns, you have 5 turns where the enemies can get cleansed potentially. And if the enemies get cleansed, then just like with Assassin's Mark getting cleansed, nothing happens, it all goes away. So I feel like snare for 5 turns is a very weak ability. I'd like to see that number going down, and then the percentage chance to snare going up. Next hero, we're going to talk about Frosty. And Frosty is one of the more recent heroes on this list, but I feel like she does deserve a buff, because if you look at her passive ability, then she is an anti-sleep hero. She does a little bit of what Elgath does, which is she does damage to all allies so that they wake up from sleep. However, there are so many ways to wake up from sleep now, like breathing. Because all of the dragons, except for Bob, the useless dummy dragon, all of the dragons now deal damage. So if you're using like even a level 1 green dragon now, that is going to remove sleep. So I feel like this kind of passive ability is not really needed. I understand that the passive ability is kind of unique at the epic level, but what is the point of an anti-sleep ability at the epic level if you're gonna nerf sleep at all levels, right? So I think she definitely should be in line for a buff. Even if she isn't, she should be. And let's move on. So we are going to talk about Brianna. Brianna is basically the same story as I talked about with the rares. Low direct damage, and I do like the Board Jester ability, but doing it to a single enemy is pretty weak in my view. And it doesn't help that her passive helps as there are more dead enemies, because you want to be using Board Jester at the start of the battle, because Board Jester limits the number of turns. So let's talk about Vivian, who's right next to Brianna. And this is pretty much the same story. So low direct damage. She does some debuffs. I actually really like the combination of Mana Leech and Life Leech. Isabelle had that back in the day before she did the vampirism thing. So I think it's a nice combination of debuffs, and I wish people would use it more. So I hope that they do go ahead and buff her damage or otherwise buff her so that she can just be used a bit more. And the next hero we're going to talk about is one hero that I've always kind of fed away or not leveled, which is Ike's. Yikes, Ike's. So I don't know what he is supposed to do. I don't get it. Like, why would anyone use him? So he does a bit of damage to all enemies. Very weak. You normally see an AoE hero doing around 20% of max HP to all enemies. He does 13. So that's very weak. Almost half of what he should be doing. Then he does vulnerability, which is not a very strong debuff. Then he does life leech, which, while interesting, is also not a very strong debuff. So I feel like he just needs a big boost. Either rework him completely or just increase his damage. You can also just put the vulnerability as the first part of his special so that he'll do a little bit more damage when he does do his hit. And next I want to talk about Morley. Let's find him. Morley is just like Yorgala in the sense that one of the things he's doing is only going to last for 2 turns, so he does Soul Link for 2 turns. I would like that to be 3 turns or percentage chance to be 3 turns. And I'll just show you what Karagon has, which is very similar. So Karagon gets Soul Link to all allies for 3 turns, 50% chance for 4 turns. So I think that second line is something that Morley could really benefit from. I do like him on offense. I used to use him, but now that they've also kind of reworked charge set so it doesn't activate at the beginning of the battle, much less usage for Morley. I've completely unequipped him and I don't use him anymore. And we're getting to the last of our epic heroes, so let's talk about a few more. Let's talk about Orinus. Orinus, she does Curse, which is a weaker form of Dispel than Direct Dispel. And just like the other heroes that should be doing a little bit more, I think that she really needs to do more. So she needs a second line of Curse, or she needs to Dispel on all enemies as well, or she needs some other thing to make her funky. Or what I would like is if she could put 2 stacks of Curse on enemies at the wave start. That could be useful as well. So I do like Orinus, but she is very weak in my opinion, the way she is right now. But not as weak as the next hero, which is Urine, who I actively loathe. And Urine is doing Heal Block and Vulnerability. Problem with this is everyone, or not everyone, but the majority of people use the Purple Dragon anyway. And the Purple Dragon does Heal Block. So in a sense, that is not very useful. Then she does Vulnerability, which is pretty weak. And then she's doing something a bit less relevant in her passive ability. If you look at some of the newer epic heroes, let's look at the family of Zarya. So if we look at Zarya is doing 2 debuffs and then a 50% chance to do a 3rd debuff. So I think that Orinus should have the same or similar kind of passive ability, 2 guaranteed debuffs, and then percentage chance for a 3rd one, for example. And the last epic hero on the list, we're going to talk about Altan. Altan is a hero that does damage to all enemies. So she does 165% of attack, and that's pretty low. I would aim for around 200. If you look at Soliana, I think Soliana does close to 200. And then she does Boar Jester, which I like. I think that, with some of these heroes I've been talking about, Brianna and Altan both do Boar Jester. A couple of people did Snare. Some people did Life Leech. I think it would be nice if these debuffs were a bit more popular, and I would like to see the heroes being buffed so that those debuffs could have that chance. So that's it for the epics. Before we go on to the legendaries, I want to talk about the fact that I'm going to be making some how-to gear videos. So that's going to be a build upon my Gear Hall of Shame series. I want to kind of bring it all together so that not only do you know how to aggressively neg hero gear, you can also kind of find a system for gearing, hopefully something that works for you. With that in mind, I would love to know what your questions are regarding gear. So do leave a comment below on what some questions might be. You can also reach me on Discord or just comment on any of my YouTube videos. It does, of course, help with algorithm if you can comment, subscribe, or share the video with your friends. This video, any other video, it's all great. So that's all very much appreciated. I am really interested in what are your questions about gear, and I want to make some very kind of basic videos as well as more advanced videos on gear. So don't worry about whatever your question is. Stupid questions are absolutely welcome. I'm gonna attempt to answer every question that you throw in. So let's now talk about the legendaries. And we're gonna go to the desert nomads, and I want to talk about Horus. Horus was a bit of a funky hero when he was released. I can't remember why. Maybe it was because he does provoke and immunity, but I think I remember people chasing Horus because they felt like he could be something different. And now I don't really see him being used. So whatever was the intention with the design, I feel like they should do something a little bit better. Maybe they could increase the chance to resurrect a random ally. Maybe they could just make him stronger, because I feel like immunity to one hero while doing provoke and reflect is not very much. Provoke is, I think, an interesting way to do it, because Horus then needs accuracy, but then if he's got immunity, maybe you want to build res so that he doesn't get the immunity taken off him. Maybe you want to also build HP and defense, and then it becomes 3 different things to build. If you want to add speed to it, it's going to be a total nightmare. So Horus is a very difficult hero to work with. I would really love to see him getting a buff, because I remember people were very interested in using him. If you look at Enkanai, the panda guy, or Taurus, you can see that an extended provoke of more than 6 turns can really mess with the enemy. So maybe that would be the simplest thing, just to make the provoke last a little bit longer. That would be happy times for me to see Horus being buffed. Next, we're going to talk about the friend of Horus, well, at least in the same faction. So this is Hephrona. I've never leveled Hephrona. I always thought she was weak, so I think it would be nice to buff her. She's supposed to be a fast hero that attacks the enemy and then does some status block on them. So maybe she could have a higher attack score, though I personally don't think that's needed. I think people probably use her as a bit more of a support hero. I've seen some of the newer rare heroes inflict 1 status on 1 target and then have a percentage chance to inflict a second status on a second target. So maybe if they would add a line to the bottom of her passive ability saying 50% chance to inflict status block for 4 turns on another random enemy, I think that could be a good way to make her at least a little bit more useful. And then we're going to talk about Oberon, which is one of the most hated and ridiculed heroes in the game. So probably not much needs to be said about why he should be buffed, but he basically doesn't do very much. He removes 2 negative statuses from himself, has a small chance to remove all of them from himself, then he does damage to 1 enemy. So I haven't got him personally. I've never used him. His PR is terrible, so I would love to see him get a bit of a buff and then see if the consensus changes. Next hero is a very old hero. It's Dobrinka. And I think that the way she is done at the moment, she could be an epic hero. If you don't look at her, if you see what it says on the card, she gives 2 buffs to all allies. That's pretty meh, right? It could happen to an epic hero. And for the passive ability, she gives a bit of mana, a bit of HP. So I think the easiest way to buff her is to increase the amount of mana and the amount of HP that she gives to all allies. That would be an easy way to do it. They could also increase the number of turns of immunity that she gives at the start. That could be okay as well. Next hero is right next to Dobrinka, is Lumina. Lumina was marketed as the ultimate farmer, and then after that, they made her become the ultimate laughingstock because they released Brig and Brody, who farm much faster than her. It's already been said that they won't speed up Lumina's animation, so she's gonna stay crap. But I think that they could do a lot to make her stronger. So they could make her do more attack damage. They could also give her more mana at the beginning of the wave. Something that I think could also be interesting and would help with farming actually is if she would block resurrection of heroes. Maybe not of all heroes like Necros, but if she would block self-resurrection of heroes so that Valentina couldn't resurrect herself. I think that would go a long way to helping her be more effective in the Cursed Gate campaign farming, and might also work for the Phoenix Rifts for the levels that have Valentina in it. That said, I believe they are going to change the campaign so that the campaign farming enemies will also be different, but I hope something will happen to make Lumina a bit more worth earning. Next hero, I want to talk about Cyril. Cyril is one of the oldest heroes. He was there when I started playing the game, and I think he just needs to do more. If you look at his attack damage, it's pretty pathetic. This is not even up to 300 either, so he's like the prime example of a hero that should be buffed. And then he removes one positive status with a true chance. That's good. He does increase speed, which is not doing much. I've never seen it do anything for him. And then he has a small chance to recast his special ability. So one thing they could do is make the chance to recast like 100% or a lot higher. They could increase his attack damage as well. I really like to see him buffed. He's an old hero. Think he would deserve it. Next, we're going to talk about a hero that used to be popular, isn't so popular anymore. It's Claws. So back in the day, I tomed Claws, and not fully tomed because I'm cheap, but he doesn't get much exercise nowadays. You see Mrs. Claus being used a lot in Arena now with the Relic, and I think the new Cape Relic has done a lot to bring the Reds back to the Arena. I think if they want the Red to become a meta, one smart thing they could do is to buff Claws so that people would bring him along with Mrs. Claus. All they would need to do is buff his attack damage, either by increasing the percentage number on the screen or adding a line that says ignore this percentage of damage. I think that would be a really nice move for Claws. Next hero, let's talk about Freya. I recently unequipped Freya because I don't really see her as an important hero for me anymore. She was the boasted hero when I joined the game, so I always have a soft spot for Freya. My problem with Freya is she does a very low amount of direct damage. Most heroes that have one target will deal 40% of their max HP or more. She only does 20%, so it's half. And one thing that they could do is just move the stun line higher. So if they would make stun the first item on what she does, that would already be a bit of a buff. Sometimes the enemies have 9 statuses on them, so you can only put one more status on. I'd much rather, if I was using Freya, have it be stun than decrease defense. So one very small buff they could do is put the stun line at the top. So stun first, then decrease damage, then do direct damage based on HP, and then there's a line that says that she does double damage if the target is affected by stun. So if they don't want to increase the percentage in her special ability, they could always make stun go first, and then she'll automatically do a bit more damage. And another hero I hope that they will buff. Actually, I hope they will buff more than this, but I had to limit the list, is Moraz. Moraz is a fusion hero from Christmas 2022, and then no one has used him. He's really bad, and I think it would be a good encouragement to the player base if they could show that they actually care, that the fusion heroes are decent. It would, in my mind, make me feel much better about any Christmas fusion hero for 2023 if I knew that the devs were interested in making sure that their fusion heroes are worth something. There's always a line to like tome him and ascend him and dust him. So I think it's fair that the players get a usable hero for the resources that they put in. Even if they didn't get it right away, better late than never. And with that, let's move on. I want to talk about Leopold. And the reason I want to talk about Leopold is he is no longer the only or one of the only revive heroes nowadays. And now that they've brought in Necros, Leopold has got the short end of the stick because he can dump his HP trying to resurrect a hero who isn't gonna get resurrected. And in that sense, Paulina is actually a better hero than him. So I would like Leopold to do something a bit smarter. Either he carries on sacrificing his HP, but then there's a line in his passive ability that if resurrection doesn't happen, then he gains his HP back, or he heals allies, or something else that happens to make up for the resurrect not going through. Or in his passive ability itself, when he does manage to resurrect someone, then do a bit more. Or so let's say he grants immunity and increased defense to the resurrected ally. Why not grant immunity and increase defense to himself as well? Right? Or you could, just to mess with people, make him get like 30% chance to gain protective shield based on 20% of max HP whenever he's attacked. And that would already make him a much more annoying hero than he is currently, even with Necros floating around in the meta. So next hero, let's move on. Let's talk about Jasper. Jasper is another old hero. My problem with him is he doesn't do much direct damage. And another easy fix for him is just to make decrease defense the first part of his special and then do the damage. I would also like to see his damage being increased. So again, most AoE HP based heroes will hit on 20% of their max HP. He's only doing 16.8 at his max ability, which is weak in my opinion. So you should do more. And actually the board jester is the best part of Jasper, I feel. So maybe he could have like a small percentage chance to cast board jester on all enemies when he's dealing his special ability. Then that would be nice. Next hero, let's talk about Cassia. Cassia used to be a very relevant hero in Arena, but now that we have the reworked dragons with the tavern, it's going to be very hard for her to be effective because her passive ability means that she recasts if she has 5 statuses on her. And now the first time that you have 4 statuses and you're affected by special ability, all of those statuses get removed by Haron at level 81. So I think that maybe something could be done here to make her relevant, even though the meta has moved on. Next, let's talk about Medonth, I feel like this is a bit of a shame because she was obviously designed to have like a funky special ability. She does poison to herself, then she does some damage, and then she does some stuff. And if you would look at another legendary hero who does something to herself, like Morena or even Akuma or Mobruk, these are genuinely very powerful heroes. And Medonth is like not a good hero at the moment. So definitely, if she's gonna do bad things to herself, she should be way more powerful than she is right now. Next, let's talk about Shun. Where is Shun? So Shun does a bit of debuffing, does a little bit of buffing, does a little bit of damage. It's a jack of all trades, master of none kind of scenario. And I think he just needs to do more damage, or do more poison, or do a bit of healing along with recovery, or also have his passive ability trigger when he's at maybe 70% HP, 50% HP, not just 100% HP. The attack increase that he has is minuscule, so he's able to get a 10% attack increase from his passive ability, which is pretty pathetic. So I'd love to see him get something better. And now let's actually talk about the Astral faction, which I've been saving for now. So I want to go back for a minute to epics, and I want to talk about Gurgis. We're on our last two heroes now. Gurgis is a hero that I have, and I've tried to make him work. I see the potential in him, actually. He does life leech. He deals damage to all enemies. He has vampirism. He makes allies immune to heal block if he's above 50%. This is good on paper, but he's not very useful in real life. So one thing is the vampirism needs to last much longer for him to benefit from it. It would also be nice, I think, if they could make his damage a little bit harder. Unlike any of the other heroes who are non-astrals, he won't have color damage, like a color affinity over anyone. So he'll lose out on that 30% bonus damage. And that means let's say even though it says 25% on this card, if you take away some of the bonus damage from it, I don't recall how it stacks, but let's say it's a true 30%. So he's down to around 16% of current HP doing damage to all enemies. And 16% is not a massive amount. So I would really like to see his damage getting increased, or maybe you could add a line here saying that he will recover HP based on the damage he deals. Something. I feel like, unlike some of the other epic astral heroes who are either amazing, like Uma Umi, Calum, and Celeste, you have the ones who just haven't been built because people don't have the resources to build them, probably like Cetus and Odium. And then you have the ones that people dread getting, which is Gurgis. So I feel like, come on, just buff him. And the last hero, number 40, that I want to talk about today is Scorpius. So Scorpius is obviously a fusible hero. You don't fuse her from other heroes, but you fuse her from shards, which you earn from events. And you do need to put in a lot of time to fuse a Scorpius. I think it's around 5 months minimum. And for what she does, I don't think she's very strong. She does a little bit of damage to all enemies. She does soul corruption, which is her main thing, but soul corruption doesn't stack. She then also does a bit of poison at the start of her turn, and that does stack, but it's not like she's having 2 turns in a row. So if you would compare her to some of the other Astral heroes like Virgo and Capri, who are obviously amazing, or even, in my opinion, a really well-built Sagittarius can be devastating. Scorpius is not on the same level. I've seen Taurus be really annoying as well. Haven't really seen many Cancers or Leos, so I can't comment. But I feel like Scorpius is the worst Astral legendary hero right now, and that shouldn't be the case because she's kind of, the most famous Astral hero eventually. Like, you have Strybog and Gwyn, who are the other fusion heroes, and they're pretty decent. So I feel like Scorpius should be good too. Well, that's my 40. I'm going to show you a bingo card that I've prepared with some of the names on it. So this only has 24 names, so I've been a bit picky. I'm also going to show a bingo template, so you can also make a screenshot of this and write down, or you can draw your own bingo card. I hope you'll play along when they announce the hero balances to see if any of us get something right. And yeah, well, I think it doesn't really matter who is going to get buffed or possibly even nerfed, even though I haven't talked about nerfs. Just be aware that it's coming. Be a bit conscious about how you use your resources in the period of the next few weeks and months, because a really heartbreaking thing to do would be to put your resources on a hero only to find that the meta has moved in a completely different direction, so that you won't get to use your hero anymore very much. Or even worse, if that hero gets nerfed for some reason. So definitely, at least if nothing else, think about whether you might want to change some of the things that you would normally do. Again, I have zero insider knowledge on this, so I'm just guessing. When I made this list, I'm totally guessing. If you can leave a comment on who you think will be changed, that would be interesting for me to know. And once again, if you have any questions for my gear series, leave them down below. I'll collect them. I'll try to answer every single gear question that you have. Thank you so much for watching and supporting, and I'll see you in the next one.